Obviously, wish him nothing but the best. I had a good working relationship with Coach Sala, being able to practice against those guys. Got a lot of respect for him. Always wishing him and his family the best. I think he's a really good football coach. But my mind is set on only how do we get better. Anything out of your control or anything that consumes your mind that's not focused on getting better is a waste of time.
Nick Sirianni was asked about the firing of Robert Saleh, and does he think about it himself? Well, what happens if this Eagles Week 6 game doesn't go so well? John McMullen, Birds 365, weekday mornings, 8 a.m. on the Jacob Media YouTube channel. He's brought to you by Boardwalk Honda. Shop their new line of pre-owned and certified pre-owned Hondas online, boardwalkhonda.com. And don't forget, we're live at Chickies and Pete's in Atlantic City, home of the Sweet Heat Wings. Man, mouth's on fire from these A.J. Brown wings. A.J. Brown back on the practice field. Johnny Mack back on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. What's going on, John?
Hey, Mike. How are you?
All good. The Phillies are out now. The Eagles get center stage. And yesterday, we got a firing the other day, and Nick Sirianni asked, did that, give him any vibes? Fair question for Nick to ask, wonder if he could be next?
Well, I'm a bad person to ask because I asked the question. So, I think it's definitely a fair question to ask. But, I think he handled it well, and that's the way. But the reality is, their same coaching class, so to speak, 2021, of the 7 coaches that were hired that year, 5 are already gone. The only 2 left are probably the 2 that get the most you-know-what, and that's Nick Sirianni and Dan Campbell, which I think tells you a lot, that people maybe need to reassess their criticisms. But everybody knows the old Bum Phillips quote, every coach in this league knows you're hired to be fired. And, it's got to make you think. And Nick used the term when he answered my question. He said, you probably think I'm bull bleeping, but I'm not. That's how I live my life. It's almost how you have to live your life as a head coach in the National Football League, because you're going to get criticized constantly.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. In your mind, he answered the question well, you said, but I'll ask you whether or not, if something drastic had, they lost to Cleveland, then lost to the Giants. The questions will continue to come, but would the Eagles even think about it?
I don't think so. But that has more to do with, most cities would, as you just saw with Robert Saleh. I just think Jeffrey Lurie would not. So that has more to do with Jeffrey Lurie than anything else. I think he's too measured. He doesn't like to do things like that. I think you see that he doesn't think there's much upside to it, and I think he's correct. Now, the one time he did fire a coach early was Chip Kelly was very late. So if you start talking about week 17, week 18, and things have gone completely off the rails, that might be a different conversation. But this early in the season, I just don't think Jeffrey Lurie is that guy.
John McMullen, Sports Illustrated, and, of course, you're taking a look at what's happening with the Eagles this week. Yesterday, the injury report had everybody back, Smith, Johnson, Brown. So the vibe, I guess, is they will play this week. Are we there yet with all 3 of those guys?
Yeah, AJ's definitely playing. Lane's definitely playing. Devonta's still in the concussion protocol technically, so he's still got to get out of it. But it's early enough in the week. He's been practicing fully. The expectation is he will get out of it. So I would be stunned if any of the 3 missed the game.
Right, and obviously getting those 3 back changes the dynamics of the offense. But how much? Yesterday, Nick was asked, what's the difference in the structure of the offense when you have Brown versus when you don't? I think that was a pretty interesting question. Like, what do they do differently? Okay, Brown's not here. Do we just keep, plowing through business as usual, or do they have to tweak things up with him out?
Well, you definitely have to tweak things up when he's out, and that's part of the problem. They haven't been able to persevere at all on that player specifically. We talk about it. A lot of the same stuff with Lane Johnson as well. with the history of him being on the field versus him being off the field, well documented. Same with A.J. Brown. They're just not the same team, and they need to do a better job in those types of situations. But, you're not replacing A.J. Brown. You don't have a backup player who can just say, all right, do what A.J. does. I think maybe, if anything, the Eagles they need to go farther away. They need to compensate better, and they haven't been able to do that. It's been a very short sample size if you think about, last year, week 18, when he got hurt in the first quarter and then the playoff games, they were a disaster. And then early this season, they were able to persevere in New Orleans and win a football game, but the offense certainly wasn't impressive. So they need to figure something out. But the hope is, obviously, 13 games left. His history is he's a durable player, that this isn't a recurring circumstance because they need him on the field.
Yep, there's no doubt getting A.J. and, Smith, who obviously losing both those two and going into a game without both of them is just, not a recipe for any sort of success. We all know that. Let's go to the defense where get your thoughts. You weren't on yesterday with Devin White getting released. I know that Nick was asked a lot about it, and I guess it comes down to there was just no role for him here.
No, once he didn't win a starting job, it was pretty clear. And in theory, he should be a pretty good special teams player. So, because of his athleticism. And I don't know if he didn't want to play it or his history, obviously, where he came out as the number 5 overall pick. He certainly wasn't asked to play special teams early in his career. Wasn't asked to play special teams at LSU. So, there's a little bit of knocked back down to earth. Maybe he didn't handle well. But once, if you're a backup linebacker, you have to play special teams. That's how it works. And, there was no – I'm surprised. As you know, you and I have had this discussion many times. It's rare where the perception of a player is so different than the reality of what was going on. And I'll even – I don't want to criticize anybody, but it seems like even some reporters, they keep asking, like, this was obvious that this was coming. Mm-hmm. And it evidently blindsided a bunch of people. It's kind of weird.
Yep, they make the decision, I guess today or yesterday, Nick talked, and he was asked if Jeremiah Trotter would be the next guy up at linebacker. He said, yep, so you got Trotter would be there. Sidney Brown back on the field. Is there any anticipation that he plays this week?
Yeah, I would expect him to play this week. Talked to Sidney today. He certainly is ready. Now that's up to the team. As he said, they have a roster spot open. He would be the obvious candidate. And, yeah, I think he's going to play. Now, how much he plays on defense, I don't think it's going to be a ton. They'll start him out as a core player on special teams. They might have a package or two to get him involved on defense. But, yeah, I expect him to play this weekend.
Yesterday there was a report that said Cooper DeJean would be the new starter. Nick didn't want to comment on it yesterday, but is it clear today that will, in fact, be the case?
Yeah, well, it's how this industry works. That's Jeremy Fowler getting around to read Vic Fangio's transcript from the week prior. That was not new news. It certainly seemed like Vic Fangio intimated that the Eagles are going to go in that direction. So that's where that stemmed from. Is it 100% official? No, but I think we all expect this is the time because post-bye, you start to think about, all right, what changes can we make to a struggling defense? And that's one of the obvious changes. There's not a lot of things you can do from a personnel standpoint. That's one of the obvious ones. So Vic kind of intimated it was coming, and that's where that kind of stemmed from.
Yeah, which there was another part of the article that he had written that basically suggested that they looked at other defensive moves too, and I'm thinking, what other moves on defense can they really make?
Yeah, I mean, I assume that's in reference to Sydney. And like I said, I think there might be a package or two. And down the road, as C.J. Gardner-Johnson continues to perform poorly, maybe that's a more relevant question. But yeah, and certainly, Bryce Huff, they're not giving up on Bryce Huff. A lot of people want to see Jalix Hunt. He's portraying Myles Garrett on the scout team this week, which is a clear indication he's not going to be heavily involved in the actual defense. So, there's not a lot they can do from a personnel perspective.
All right, they're getting ready for the Browns. We'll talk more about that tomorrow here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, and of course John Mcmullen. This was the actual. It says, I'm told multiple defensive positions were up to discussion over the past week due to a defense that ranks 30th in yards per play allowed. There you go. So I don't know where they're getting what discussions they had. They sat down and had a cup of coffee and said, all right, we got to stick with what we got because we got nothing else. That probably was a pretty short
I mean, there's concern at linebacker, obviously. And, there's a theory that they could throw Trotter into the deep end of the pool and see what they have, even Ben Van Sumeren. And so if things continue to go in a negative direction, and with Nakobe Dean and CJ specifically, and maybe that's a conversation 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road, but it's not going to be made this week.
All right, he's Johnny Mack, and of course the Eagles and Browns you can listen to right here on 97.3 ESPN with all the coverage starting at noon. Eagles are back on Sunday, and of course the Phillies are done, so the Eagles are the biggest game in town by far. Flyers do open tomorrow night, but John, we'll talk to you tomorrow, pal.
All right, thanks.